I own this building. I own the medical plaza where you park your cars, and I've known about your affair for 9 years. The silence in that ballroom was deafening. 500 people in evening wear, champagne glasses frozen halfway to their lips, all staring at me in my maintenance worker's uniform. My wife's face had gone white. Doctor. Brandon Wells looked like someone had punched him in the stomach, and I was just getting started. But let me back up. Let me tell you how a 62-year-old school janitor became the man who brought down Vancouver General Hospital's golden couple. My name is Marcus Chen, and this is the story of the worst and best night of my life. It was a Friday evening in October when everything came to a head, but the story really starts 9 years earlier. I was 53 then, working maintenance at Grandview Elementary. Not glamorous work, I'll admit. Fixing leaky faucets, unclogging toilets, keeping the boiler running through Vancouver winters. But it was honest work, and I took pride in it. My wife Victoria worked as an administrative assistant at Vancouver General Hospital back then. We'd been married 28 years. We had 2 kids, Sarah and Michael, both in their 20s and doing well. Sarah was finishing her nursing degree. Michael was working as a paralegal. We had a nice house in Burnaby, nothing fancy but paid off. Life was good. Or so I thought. Then Victoria got pregnant. I remember the day she told me. I was genuinely happy, if a bit surprised. We were both in our 50s, but stranger things have happened, right? My mother had my uncle when she was 47. Victoria seemed nervous about it, but I figured that was natural at our age. Sophie was born 8.5 months later. Premature, Victoria said. Had to stay in the NICU for a week. I was working double shifts that month because the school district was short-staffed, so I couldn't be at the hospital as much as I wanted. Victoria's new boss, Dr. Brandon Wells, was very supportive, she told me. He made sure she had the best care. Brandon Wells, chief of surgery, 43 years old, divorced, handsome, in that polished way that comes from money and privilege. He'd attended McGill, did his residency at Johns Hopkins, spoke 3 languages. The kind of man who wore his success like a tailored suit. Over the next few months, I started noticing changes. Small things at first. Victoria staying later at work, her phone always face down on the counter. New clothes, more expensive than what we usually bought. When I asked about it, she said she'd been promoted to administrative coordinator and needed to look the part. Then came the bigger changes. She started talking differently, using medical jargon I didn't understand, making comments about advancement and professional development, and increasingly, making comments about my job. Marcus, have you ever thought about doing something more? She asked one night at dinner. Sophie was 6 months old, sleeping in her bassinet next to the table. More? I was confused. You know, more ambitious, more professional. I have a profession, I said carefully. I'm a maintenance engineer. She laughed, but it wasn't warm. You're a janitor, Marcus. There's a difference. I let it go. Marriage is about picking your battles, and after 28 years, I knew when to let things slide. But it stung. The comments continued. Little cuts, here and there. Dr. Wells says people who settle for less teach their children to do the same. Dr. Wells says ambition is what separates successful people from everyone else. Dr. Wells this, Dr. Wells that. I'm not a stupid man. Despite what Victoria was starting to imply, I knew what was happening, or at least suspected. But I also knew that accusations without proof would just push her further away. So I watched. And I waited. 6 months after Sophie was born, I hired a private investigator. His name was Tom Reeves, retired RCMP, came highly recommended. Cost me $1,500 up front, but I needed to know. Tom came back with photos 2 weeks later. Victoria and Brandon, leaving the Fairmont Hotel together, getting into his BMW, kissing in the parking garage. The pictures were dated and time-stamped. Tuesday afternoons, mostly. When I was working at the school and thought Victoria was at work. But Tom found something else too. Something that made my blood run cold. Marcus, he said, sliding another folder across the table at the Tim Hortons where we'd met. I did some digging into Dr. Wells. Financial records, hospital procurement documents. There's something off about the equipment purchases going through your wife's office. I opened the folder. Inside were invoices, purchase orders, bank transfers. Hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing through Victoria's department for medical equipment that, according to Tom's sources, had never actually arrived at the hospital. "They're embezzling," Tom said quietly. "Dr. Wells is approving purchases from shell companies he controls. Your wife is processing the payments. They're splitting the money." I sat there, coffee growing cold in my hand, staring at the evidence. My wife wasn't just cheating on me. She was a criminal. "There's one more thing," Tom said. He looked uncomfortable. "I think you should get a DNA test for Sophie." I did the test that week. Took Sophie's pacifier, sent it to a private lab along with a cheek swab from me. The results came back 10 days later. Sophie wasn't mine. I sat in my truck in the Grandview Elementary parking lot, reading that report over and over. 0% probability of paternity. Sophie, my baby daughter, the child I'd been getting up with at night, changing diapers for, singing to sleep, wasn't biologically mine. The affair had been going on for at least 9 years. Probably longer. Sophie was 8.5 months old, born premature. The math worked perfectly if Victoria had gotten pregnant right after starting her new position under Dr. Wells. A lot of men would have confronted their wives immediately. Lawyers, divorce, scorched earth. But I'm not most men. I'm patient. I'm methodical. And I was raised to finish what I start properly. See, there's something I hadn't told Victoria. Something I'd never felt the need to mention because, honestly, it never seemed relevant to our life together. I own property. A lot of it. My grandfather came to Vancouver from Hong Kong in 1968 with almost nothing. He worked in restaurants, saved every penny, and bought a small commercial building in what was then a rough part of downtown. He was smart about it, held on through the tough years, and when the neighborhood gentrified, that building was worth 10 times what he paid. When he died, he left it to my father. My father bought 2 more buildings. When he died, he left everything to me, his only son. I'd been quietly managing these properties for 15 years, reinvesting the rental income into more real estate. I now owned 7 commercial buildings in Vancouver and the surrounding area. One of those buildings housed Vancouver General Hospital's main administrative offices. Another contained their off-site medical supply warehouse. A third held the medical plaza, where staff, including Dr. Brandon Wells, leased office space. Victoria knew I owned some property. She thought it was a duplex I rented out. She'd never asked for details, and I'd never volunteered them. Why would I? She was increasingly embarrassed by my janitor job. Imagine how she'd react to knowing her simple husband was actually quite wealthy. It would complicate things. She might want access to money for the wrong reasons, so I'd kept it quiet. The buildings were held under an LLC, managed by a property management company. The income went into accounts Victoria didn't know about. I still worked as a janitor, because I genuinely enjoyed it. Kids need someone who cares, and I liked being that person for them. But now, sitting with evidence of my wife's betrayal and crimes, I realized my secret gave me leverage. I spent the next 8 years planning. Yes, 8 years. Because rushing this would have been stupid, and I'm not a stupid man. First, I made copies of everything. Tom's photos, the financial documents, the DNA test. I stored originals in a safety deposit box at a different bank than where Victoria and I had our joint accounts. Second, I hired a forensic accountant, quiet guy named Harold, who specialized in healthcare fraud. I paid him well to dig deeper into the embezzlement scheme. Over 3 years, Harold documented over $800,000 that Victoria and Brandon had stolen from the hospital. He tracked it to offshore accounts, shell companies, and cash withdrawals. Third, I documented the affair. Not just photos, but hotel records, credit card statements, phone logs. I built an airtight timeline. I even found the hotel room they used most frequently, the Sutton Place, room 847, every Tuesday afternoon for 7 years. Fourth, I secured my assets, transferred full ownership of properties into irrevocable trusts, named Sarah and Michael as beneficiaries. Made sure Victoria couldn't touch them in a divorce. Fifth, I made sure Sarah and Michael knew the truth. I told them when Sophie turned 6, old enough that they'd start noticing family resemblance issues anyway. They were angry, hurt, but ultimately supportive. "Whatever you need to do, Dad," Sarah said, hugging me. "We're with you." And finally, I waited for the perfect moment. That moment came in October. 8 years after I'd first hired Tom. Vancouver General Hospital announced their annual fundraising gala. Victoria, who'd climbed the ranks to hospital administrator over those years, was receiving the Healthcare Leadership Award. 500 guests, media coverage, the hospital board of directors, all the major donors, and Dr. Brandon Wells was giving the introduction speech. I got the invitation in the mail 6 weeks before the event. Marcus Chen and guest, it read. Victoria hadn't even told me about it. "Oh, that," she said dismissively when I asked. "It's a work thing. You probably don't want to go. It's formal, lots of medical people. You'd be bored." "I'd like to support you," I said. She looked at me with barely concealed annoyance. "Fine. But try to look presentable. It's black tie." Black tie? I didn't own a tuxedo, and I knew Victoria was hoping I'd use that as an excuse not to come. Instead, I said I'd come straight from work. No time to change. The week before the gala, I made my moves. I contacted the hospital's board of directors through my lawyer, sent them a package containing executive summaries of the embezzlement evidence, the affair documentation, and the DNA results. I requested an emergency meeting for the evening of the gala, before the event started. I contacted the Crown Prosecutor's office. In Canada, unlike the United States, we don't have private criminal prosecutors. Criminal cases are handled by the Crown. I provided them with all of Harold's financial documentation. They opened an investigation immediately. I filed for divorce, served Victoria with papers at her office the Monday before the gala. She called me, furious. "Are you insane?" she shrieked. "Filing for divorce 3 days before my award ceremony?" "I thought the timing was appropriate," I said calmly. "This is because I said you were embarrassing me at the hospital functions, isn't it? Marcus, grow up. Not everything is about you." "You're right," I said. "This isn't about me. It's about Sophie." Silence on the line. "What about Sophie?" Her voice had changed, gone cold. "DNA test. She's not mine." The lawyer included it with the papers. More silence. "Then, Marcus, we can talk about this. There's an explanation. I'm sure there is. You can explain it in court. Or to the police. Your choice." I hung up. The day of the gala, I went to work as usual. Fixed a broken water fountain in the third-grade hallway. Helped the janitor in the cafeteria with a dishwasher issue. At 4 o'clock, I changed into a fresh uniform, neat and clean. Dark blue work pants, matching shirt with Grandview Elementary maintenance, embroidered on the chest. I drove to the Fairmont Hotel, Vancouver, where the gala was being held. The valet looked confused when I pulled up in my 15-year-old Chevy truck, but I handed him the keys and walked in. The ballroom was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, centerpieces of orchids and roses, people in evening gowns and tuxedos milled around, sipping champagne and networking. I stood out like a janitor at a black tie event, which is to say, completely. Victoria saw me from across the room. Her face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Shock, horror, anger, calculation. She was wearing a silver evening gown that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Dr. Brandon Wells stood next to her, distinguished in his tuxedo, hand possessively on the small of her back. I waved, walked over to get a ginger ale from the bar. "Marcus," Victoria hissed, appearing at my elbow. "What the hell are you wearing?" "My work clothes," I said pleasantly. "You said I should come straight from work." "So I did. I didn't think you'd actually." She stopped, took a breath. "People are staring." "I imagined so. Can you at least try not to embarrass me tonight?" She glanced around nervously. "This is the most important night of my career." "Don't worry," I said. "I promise this will be a night you'll never forget." She didn't catch the double meaning, shook her head and walked away, back to Brandon, who looked at me with barely concealed contempt. The dinner was excellent. I'll give them that. Braised beef tenderloin, roasted vegetables, some kind of fancy potato thing. I sat at Victoria's table, along with Brandon, several board members, and the hospital's CEO. They all made polite conversation around me, clearly uncomfortable with the maintenance worker in their midst. "So, Marcus," the CEO said, obviously trying to be kind. "Victoria tells us you work in facility management." "I'm a janitor," I said cheerfully. "At Grandview Elementary." Uncomfortable silence. "That's nice," someone else offered. "Important work." "It is," I agreed. "Someone has to keep things clean and running smoothly." Speaking of which, Victoria, how's the hospital's procurement system running these days? Victoria's fork clattered on her plate. Brandon's jaw tightened. Fine, Victoria said shortly. Marcus, why don't you tell everyone about your hobbies? The evening dragged on. Speeches, awards for various donors and staff. Finally, it was time for Victoria's award. Brandon stood up to give the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice smooth and practiced. Tonight we honor someone truly exceptional. Victoria Chen has transformed our administrative operations, bringing efficiency and innovation to every department she touches. She's increased our procurement effectiveness by 40%. I almost laughed at that. Yes, procurement effectiveness. That's one way to describe embezzlement. But what impresses me most about Victoria is her dedication despite personal challenges. Not everyone has a supportive partner who understands the demands of ambition. Some of us have to succeed despite obstacles at home. He glanced at me. Several people at nearby tables did too. Victoria has shown us that professional excellence isn't about your circumstances. It's about your character. She's proven that you can achieve greatness even when your personal life doesn't match your professional aspirations. Even when your partner, he paused meaningfully, looking at my maintenance uniform, doesn't share your drive. Light laughter from some tables, sympathetic looks toward Victoria. Ladies and gentlemen, Victoria Chen, Healthcare Administrator of the Year. Applause. Victoria stood, smiling graciously, walked to the podium, hugged Brandon. Maybe the hug lasted a bit too long. Maybe their eyes held a bit too much familiarity. But most people wouldn't notice. I noticed. Victoria gave her acceptance speech, thanked the board, thanked the staff, thanked Dr. Wells specifically for his unwavering support and mentorship. She looked at me once during the speech, her expression unreadable. And finally, she said, her voice catching slightly, I want to thank my family, my children, Sarah and Michael, who have always believed in me, and my husband, Marcus, who has been there through everything. Polite applause. I didn't join in. She left the podium, returned to the table, sat down next to Brandon, put her hand on his under the table. Again, most people wouldn't notice. I noticed everything. The CEO stood up, starting to transition to the next part of the program. That's when I stood up. The room's attention turned to me, confused. You don't stand up in the middle of a gala unless you're going to the bathroom or making a toast. And janitors don't make toasts at events like this. If I could have everyone's attention, I said. My voice was steady, calm. 62 years old, and I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Victoria's eyes went wide. Marcus, what are you? Thank you, Dr. Wells, for that interesting introduction, I continued, ignoring her. You're right that Victoria has faced challenges, personal obstacles. And you're absolutely right that she's succeeded despite her circumstances at home. Some confused looks. Brandon was frowning now, uncertain where this was going. See, being married to someone who's having a 9-year affair with her boss must be challenging, I said conversationally, especially when that affair produces a child. Especially when that same boss and that same wife are embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from this very hospital. The room erupted, not immediately, but like a wave. First shocked silence, then gasps, then everyone talking at once. Sit down, Brandon hissed, standing up. You're delusional, am I? I pulled out my phone, connected it to the hotel's AV system. The large screens around the room, previously showing Victoria's award citation, now showed something else. Photos. Time-stamped, dated. Victoria and Brandon entering and leaving the Sutton Place Hotel. Kissing in parking garages, holding hands in restaurants. These photos span 9 years, I continued. I have hundreds more, along with hotel records, credit card statements, and phone logs. Would you like me to show those too? Victoria had gone absolutely white. Marcus, stop this. I also have these. The screen changed. Financial documents, bank transfers, shell company registrations, $847,000, to be exact. Stolen from this hospital through fake medical equipment purchases. The money went to offshore accounts controlled by Dr. Wells and processed by my wife. The CEO was standing now, along with several board members. The hospital's legal counsel was frantically making a phone call. That's defamation, Brandon shouted. Those documents are fabricated. They're not, I said calmly. The Crown Prosecutor's office already has copies. They've been investigating for 3 weeks. I believe you'll both be arrested soon. Criminal fraud, theft over $5,000, breach of trust. The charges list is quite extensive. I looked at Victoria. She was crying now, makeup running, the carefully crafted image of success crumbling in real time. And finally, there's this. The screen changed one last time. A DNA test result. Sophie, our 8-year-old daughter, isn't mine. She's Dr. Wells's child. Born 9 months after Victoria started her new position under him. Interesting timing, don't you think? The room was in complete chaos now. Reporters were taking photos. Board members were conferring urgently. Security was moving toward me, uncertain what to do. Now, Dr. Wells mentioned that Victoria succeeded despite her circumstances at home. Let me address that. I looked around the room, made eye contact with as many people as I could. It's true, I'm a janitor. I fix toilets, unclog drains, keep boilers running. Not glamorous work. But here's what Dr. Wells and my wife don't know. I paused. Let the moment build. I own this building. The Fairmont Hotel Vancouver sits on land that belongs to me, leased to Fairmont Hotels through my property management company. I also own the building where Vancouver General Hospital's administrative offices are located, the medical plaza where Dr. Wells has his private practice, the warehouse where the hospital stores medical supplies. 7 commercial buildings in total, worth approximately $85 million. Dead silence now. You could have heard a pin drop. So yes, Victoria succeeded despite her circumstances. She's married to a janitor who happens to be a multimillionaire. A janitor who's known about her affair and her crimes for 8 years. A janitor who's been documenting everything, working with forensic accountants and prosecutors, building an ironclad case. I turned to face Victoria and Brandon directly. A janitor who owns the buildings you work in. And by the way, Vancouver General Hospital's lease on their administrative building is up for renewal in 3 months. I'm declining to renew it. You'll need to find new office space. Victoria collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Brandon looked like he wanted to run, but was frozen in place. The board of directors received a full report this afternoon, I continued. The Crown Prosecutor has all the evidence. My divorce lawyer has filed for full custody of Sarah and Michael, who are adults anyway, and limited supervised visitation for Sophie until Victoria completes whatever sentence she receives. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. Enjoy the rest of your gala. I have a maintenance emergency at Grandview Elementary, a burst pipe in the gym. Real work, you know. The kind of work that actually matters. I walked out of that ballroom in my janitor's uniform, past 500 stunned people in evening wear, and I've never felt prouder in my life. The aftermath was exactly what you'd expect. Victoria and Brandon were arrested 4 days later. The news coverage was extensive. Hospital administrator and chief of surgery, charged with fraud, read the headlines. The hospital did damage control, emphasized that they were victims too, fired both of them immediately. The trial took 14 months. Harold, my forensic accountant, testified about the embezzlement scheme. Tom, the private investigator, presented the affair evidence. The Crown Prosecutor was thorough and professional. Victoria pleaded guilty to fraud and received 3 years in prison, eligible for parole after 18 months. Brandon got 5 years because the Crown proved he'd masterminded the scheme. The divorce was finalized while Victoria was in prison. I got full custody of Sarah and Michael, though they're adults and don't need custody. Sophie was the complicated part. The family court judge ruled that Victoria would have supervised visitation rights after her release, increasing to regular visitation if she completes therapy and maintains stability. Sophie lives with me now. She's 9 years old, smart as a whip, and deserves better than what her parents gave her. I've never told her the full truth about who her biological father is. When she asks about her mom being in prison, I tell her that her mom made serious mistakes but still loves her, which might even be true, in whatever way Victoria is capable of love. Sarah and Michael have been incredible through all of this. They visit often, help with Sophie, and have actually gotten closer to me through this mess. Sarah finished her nursing degree and works at a different hospital. Michael made partner at his law firm. They're good kids. I'm proud of them. As for me, I still work as a janitor at Grandview Elementary. The kids need someone who cares, and I'm good at the work. I like fixing things, keeping things clean and orderly. There's dignity in honest labor, no matter what Victoria thought. But I also manage my real estate portfolio now, more actively. I've used some of the income to set up scholarship funds for kids from working-class families. The Marcus Chen Educational Fund helps pay for trade schools, community colleges, whatever they need to build good lives. Because here's what I learned through all of this. Success isn't about job titles or prestige. It's not about wearing tuxedos to galas or having impressive degrees. Success is about integrity. It's about doing your work well, whatever that work is. It's about being honest, even when honesty isn't convenient. It's about being patient and strategic rather than reactive and emotional. Victoria and Brandon thought they were successful. They had the titles, the recognition, the admiration, but they built it all on lies and theft. When you build your life on dishonesty, eventually it collapses. And when it does, you lose everything. I spent 8 years watching and waiting. Some people might say I should have confronted them sooner, that I wasted years of my life. But I don't see it that way. Those 8 years taught me patience. They taught me the value of careful planning. They taught me that revenge, when it's righteous, when it's justified, when it's executed properly, isn't about anger. It's about justice. And justice, real justice, takes time. There's another lesson too, one I hope Sophie learns as she grows up. People will judge you based on surface appearances. They'll see your work clothes or your job title and make assumptions about your worth. Let them. The opinions of shallow people don't matter. What matters is who you actually are when no one's watching. Your character, your integrity, your actions. Those are the things that define you, not what you wear to galas or what's embroidered on your work shirt. I'm 62 years old now. I fix broken things at an elementary school. I own buildings worth tens of millions of dollars. I raised 3 kids, even though one isn't biologically mine. I exposed criminals and brought them to justice. I did it all by being patient, methodical, and honest. And you know what? I sleep perfectly fine at night. Can Victoria say the same? That's the real measure of success. Not awards or recognition, not evening gowns and champagne, but being able to look yourself in the mirror and know you did the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it took years, even when everyone underestimated you. They called me just a janitor. Turns out, that janitor owned the buildings they worked in. That janitor took them down legally and completely. That janitor taught his children about real integrity. Not bad for someone who fixes toilets for a living. If you're ever in a situation where people underestimate you, where they judge you by your appearance or your job rather than your character, let them. Use their assumptions against them. Be patient. Be strategic. Build your case methodically. And when the time is right, show them exactly who they were underestimating. Trust me, the look on their faces makes every moment of patience worth it.